in an agricultural economy, a pre-industrial agricultural economy, the source of food is what keeps a state functioning, what keeps a society functioning. And when food supplies diminish, if it's a 1 or 2 year bad harvest, the Ming was able to get through that because they had granaries, they had policies for moving grain from places where grain was abundant to places where grain was missing, it was not there. So the Ming administration had ways of dealing with bad harvests. But when you get a bad harvest that goes on for 5 or 6 years, it exhausts the resources of the state. When there is no grain to harvest in the fields, the price of grain skyrockets. And this is, and the only reason, well, not the only reason, but the usual reason for grain prices to soar is that either the temperatures are too cold, the rainfall is insufficient, or the rainfall is excessive and is washing away the fields in which the grain is growing. And so to get to the, if you like, to get to the foundation of Ming society as an agrarian society, you have to pay attention to agricultural production. And when climate is stripping out the very conditions that allow rice to be grown or millet to be grown in the fields, or whatever grains, wherever they're being grown, when you can't grow the grain, then this gets reflected in prices. Now, the prices I've worked with are prices reported in local gazetteers. And I can't entirely say these prices are actual market prices. Sometimes a price is given as much as to say, well, if somebody was going to say, oh, I really like that car, but it's going to cost me $1 million. I mean, clearly a car is not going to cost anyone $1 million, but it's a figure of speech. And so I've had to filter that a little bit in my data. But what I found is that rather than saying, oh, a liter of grain is going to go to 100 copper coins, that became the sort of standard famine price. But then it went up to 200 copper coins. It went up to 1,000 copper coins. And these were prices that people couldn't afford. So what I'm saying here is that grain prices, I think, are an excellent proxy for what the climate is doing to agriculture. And I was curious, I mean, I read European history, and I was curious that there's no climate historian of Europe, other than there are 2 German climate historians who have used grain prices as a proxy for climate change. But generally, grain prices are not used by European historians. And I wrote to Jeffrey Parker about this. I've known Jeffrey for years. He wrote the Global Crisis book, which looked at if you like, the late Ming as it was experienced in Europe. And I said, I don't find any grain prices in your book. And he wrote back and said, no, I didn't use that data. I had other data that I was using. So for a China historian who has looked at a lot of different factors in the Ming period, it seemed to me that this is going to be our best documentary proxies. Now, we have other proxies as well. There are ice core samples, rainfall reconstructions, climate reconstructions based on tree rings and all that sort of thing. And there are Chinese scientists and others who have been collecting that kind of data. But as a documentary historian, I found that I discovered that what I'd found in local gazetteers was probably the closest proxy you can find for the impact that climate was having on Ming society.